It was the summer of 1944, and across the American Midwest, life carried on far from the battlefields of Europe. Towns buzzed with factories running at full capacity, garages filled with Fords and Chevrolets waiting for repairs, and families adjusting to the rhythm of war rationing. Into this world, behind fences topped with barbed wire, came thousands of German prisoners of war, shipped across the Atlantic and scattered in camps throughout the United States. Many of them were assigned to local workshops, ordered to repair the very cars that symbolized American abundance and freedom. As they worked, glove compartments and back seats became unexpected archives of civilian life. Ones, sometimes still tucked into envelopes, speaking of mundane joys and sorrows, of school plays and garden harvests. There were often ticket stubs for cinemas or baseball games, small coins, and even forgotten tubes of lipstick, remnants of lives lived with a casualness that felt almost sacrilegious to men who had known only scarcity and rigid order for years. Among these prisoners was a young man named Klaus, barely 20, his uniform replaced by drab work clothes, his mind still a fortress built from the doctrines of his youth. He had arrived in this vast, sprawling land with a deep-seated conviction of its impending collapse, convinced by countless hours of propaganda that America was a nation of weak, decadent capitalists on the brink of ruin, its people softened by luxury and materialism. The journey across the Atlantic had been a blur of steel and salt, an ignominious end to what he believed was a righteous struggle. He expected to see a land ravaged by its own internal contradictions, perhaps even signs of the poverty his leaders had so often described. Instead, his first impression, even from the window of the transport train, was of an unsettling, almost defiant normalcy. Vast fields stretched to horizons unmarred by bomb craters, and towns, though not grand, seemed intact, bustling with an ordinary rhythm that defied all he had been told. His assignment to the motor pool, repairing civilian vehicles, felt at first like a deliberate insult. These were not the robust, utilitarian machines of war, but often brightly painted, bulbous contraptions adorned with gleaming chrome, designed for comfort rather than combat. The smell of oil and gasoline mingled with something else, a faint, sweet scent of lingering perfume or stale cigarettes that spoke of private lives, a stark contrast to the metallic tang of blood and cordite he was accustomed to. He approached his first vehicle, a deep blue sedan with a chipped fender, with a mixture of disdain and intense, almost scientific curiosity. His hands, once firm around a rifle stock, now fumbled with unfamiliar wrenches and spark plugs. He expected shoddy workmanship, a testament to American industrial decline. Instead, he found an underlying solidity, a robust engineering that, while different from German design, was undeniably efficient. It was not the mechanics, however, that truly began to unravel his world. It was what he found within these machines. The propaganda had painted American civilians as a faceless, materialistic horde. Yet, tucked beneath a worn seat, Klaus discovered a small, leather-bound wallet. Inside, among a few dollars, was a faded photograph. A woman with a kind smile, her arm around two laughing children on a sun-drenched beach. Their joy seemed almost defiant, a stark contradiction to the images of despair and internal strife he had been fed. He quickly tucked it back, a flicker of something he could not name stirring within him. Later, while cleaning a glove compartment, his fingers brushed against a crumpled piece of paper. It was a shopping list, meticulously written. Milk, bread, butter, eggs, sirloin roast, apples, sugar, coffee, candy for Susie. The sheer abundance of it, the casual mention of sirloin roast and candy, struck him with a force more potent than any physical blow. In his homeland, such items were rationed, luxuries, or mere memories. Here they were ordinary, written down without a second thought. An older prisoner, Schmidt, a man whose face bore the etched lines of too many winters and too much disillusionment, noticed Klaus's stillness. "More American decadence, eh, boy?" Schmidt muttered, his voice a low rumble, devoid of conviction. He had seen too much, fought too long, to cling to the old certainties with the same fervor. Klaus merely grunted, turning back to the engine, but the image of the shopping list, the casual mention of candy for Susie, lingered. He had always believed that his people were making sacrifices for a greater future, enduring hardship for an ultimate victory against a soft, corrupt enemy. But what if the enemy was not soft? What if their abundance was not decadence, but simply a different kind of strength? The thought was a dangerous whisper in his mind, quickly suppressed, but not forgotten. Each day brought new discoveries. A child's drawing, crudely depicting a house and a smiling sun, taped to a sun visor. A small, well-loved doll, its fabric worn smooth from countless embraces, nestled in the back seat. These were not the signs of a collapsing empire, but of a thriving, deeply personal world, untouched by the direct hand of war, a world of small joys and ordinary routines that his own nation had sacrificed. One afternoon, while replacing a punctured tire, a woman approached the fence that separated the repair yard from the outside world. She was not the stern, victorious figure he might have imagined, but a woman in a simple dress, carrying a wicker basket. She spoke to one of the guards, her voice soft, and then, to Klaus's utter astonishment, she offered a small, freshly baked apple pie through the wire, not to the guard, but to the prisoner working nearest her. "For your lunch," she said, her smile gentle, her eyes holding no judgment, only a simple human kindness. The guard, a burly man who usually maintained a rigid distance, nodded, almost imperceptibly, and allowed the exchange. Klaus, who happened to be that nearest prisoner, took the pie, his fingers brushing hers for a fleeting second. The warmth of the crust, the sweet cinnamon scent, was an assault on his senses. He had expected contempt, perhaps even scorn, but certainly not this unsolicited gesture of warmth. He looked at the pie, then at the woman, who merely smiled again before turning to leave. It was a small, almost insignificant act, yet it resonated with a power that shook the foundations of his carefully constructed worldview. This was not the enemy. This was simply a woman, offering food, an act of pure, unadulterated humanity that transcended the battle lines drawn by ideology. The warmth of the apple pie lingered in Klaus's hands long after the woman had departed, her simple act a dissonant melody in the cacophony of his ingrained beliefs. He carried it back to his workbench, the sweet scent of cinnamon and baked apples a stark contrast to the metallic tang of oil and sweat that usually permeated the repair yard. He ate it slowly, each bite a revelation. It was soft, sweet, real. Not the ersatz, rationed fare of his homeland, but a genuine, unadulterated pleasure. He found himself staring at the flaky crust, then at his own rough hands, a chasm opening between the propaganda's depiction of the enemy and the undeniable, tangible kindness he had just received. The woman's eyes, devoid of malice, seemed to mock the rigid doctrines that had shaped his entire life. He had been taught to despise them, to see them as a homogeneous mass of materialistic, unfeeling adversaries. Yet here was a face, a gesture, that defied every lesson. Days turned into weeks, each car a new chapter in an unfolding, unsettling narrative. He worked on a family sedan, its back seat littered with children's picture books and a well-worn teddy bear. He found a small, hand-drawn map of a local park, carefully folded, tucked into the sun visor, complete with crayon-marked paths and a joyful, if crudely drawn, ice cream stand. These were not the artifacts of a nation on the brink of collapse, but of a society that afforded its youngest members a childhood of simple pleasures, a luxury Klaus himself had barely known. He began to notice the sheer volume of these vehicles, the endless stream of them requiring repair, each one a testament to an industrial output that dwarfed anything he had ever imagined. Thousands upon thousands of these machines, not just military trucks, but personal conveyances, ferrying families to picnics, to schools, to the mundane errands of a life untouched by the immediate devastation of war. The scale of it was staggering, a silent, overwhelming refutation of the scarcity his people had endured. One afternoon, while fixing a radio in a convertible, a melody drifted out, light and buoyant, a tune he couldn't place but which spoke of carefree evenings and laughter. It was an American song, entirely alien to the martial anthems and somber folk tunes of his youth. It was a sound of peace, of everyday joy, a stark contrast to the distant, muffled echoes of bombings and rationing that still resonated in his memory. Schmidt, working nearby, caught his eye. "Sounds like their world keeps spinning, eh, boy?" he grunted, a cynical edge to his voice. But Klaus sensed a weariness there, too, a shared recognition of the profound disconnect between what they had been told and what they were witnessing. Klaus merely nodded, his gaze fixed on the radio dial, the unfamiliar notes weaving themselves into the fabric of his thoughts. That evening, back in the sparse barracks, Klaus retrieved the faded photograph he had found. The smiling woman, the laughing children on the beach. He looked at their faces, then remembered the woman with the pie, her gentle smile. He tried to reconcile these images with the caricatures of the enemy etched into his mind by years of propaganda, the greedy capitalist, the decadent pleasure seeker. But the faces in the photograph, the warmth of the pie, the simple, innocent drawings, spoke of something else entirely, of a shared humanity, of lives lived with a sense of security and abundance that felt almost mythical. He traced the outline of the woman's face with a finger, a quiet ache settling in his chest. His nation had sacrificed so much, endured such hardship, for a future that now seemed to exist effortlessly, here, in the very heart of the enemy's land. The certainty he had carried across the Atlantic, that unwavering belief in his own nation's righteous cause and the enemy's imminent downfall, was eroding, not with a bang, but with the quiet hum of an American car engine, the scent of apple pie, and the silent smiles of strangers in photographs. The world he had known was not collapsing. It was simply revealing itself to be a vast, intricate tapestry, woven with threads he had never been allowed to see. The disillusionment was a slow, creeping cold, a quiet collapse of the fortress within. The quiet collapse within Klaus continued, a gradual process of erosion rather than a sudden shattering. Each day, the repair yard became less a place of punishment and more a reluctant classroom. He learned not just the mechanics of American engines, but the silent language of their civilian lives. The sheer volume of vehicles passing through their hands was a constant, almost overwhelming testament to a prosperity he had been taught was a lie. He heard guards speak casually of millions of cars on the roads, a number so vast it felt abstract, yet the endless stream of sedans and coupes demanding attention made it terrifyingly real. In his homeland, a family might own a bicycle, perhaps a motorcycle if they were fortunate. Here, the automobile seemed as commonplace as a cooking pot. This scale, this effortless abundance, mocked the sacrifices his own people had endured, the belts tightened, the resources diverted to a war effort that now seemed impossibly futile against such an opponent. He began to notice the small, incidental details that spoke volumes. A child's lunchbox, left forgotten under a seat, still holding the faint scent of peanut butter and jelly, a combination he had never encountered but which smelled of simple, innocent nourishment. Another time, while replacing a broken window, he saw a small, ornate silver locket, engraved with initials tucked into the upholstery. It was not valuable in itself, but its presence spoke of sentiment, of personal histories, of a world where such small treasures were cherished and not lost to the exigencies of conflict. These were not the spoils of a decadent, collapsing empire, but the quiet, unassuming artifacts of lives lived with a sense of security and continuity. Schmidt, ever the sardonic observer, often offered his own weary commentary. "They have so much, don't they, boy? Too much, perhaps. Makes you wonder what we were fighting for, when they have all this and more, just lying about." His voice was low, almost a whisper, but it carried the weight of years of unasked questions. Klaus rarely responded, preferring to let the older man's words hang in the air, echoing his own unspoken doubts. He found himself studying the faces of the American civilians who occasionally came to collect their repaired cars. They were not the caricatures of propaganda, no sneering capitalists, no weak-chinned degenerates. They were ordinary people, a young mother with a toddler clinging to her skirt, an older man with kind eyes, a teenager with a wide, innocent smile. Their expressions were not of triumph or malice, but of mild impatience, of relief at having their vehicle back, of the mundane concerns of daily life. One evening, after a particularly long day, a fellow prisoner, a quiet man named Richter, who had been a barber before the war, found a small leather-bound diary in a Cadillac's glove compartment. It belonged to a young woman, and Richter, who spoke a little English, translated a few lines for the small circle of prisoners gathered around him in the barracks. "She writes about a dance," he murmured, his brow furrowed, "and how she hoped a certain boy would ask her." He translated another passage. "She's worried about her brother, who is serving overseas, but then talks about a new dress she bought for the summer picnic." The words, mundane and deeply personal, painted a picture of a life where wartime anxieties coexisted with the simple pleasures of youth, of fashion, of social gatherings. For Klaus, who had known only the stark, unyielding reality of war since his own youth, this casual blend of worry and frivolity was a profound cultural shock. His own memories of that age were of drills, of ideological lectures, of the grim preparation for sacrifice. The diary, a window into another life, seemed almost impossibly light, yet deeply resonant in its humanity. He remembered the photograph of the woman and children he had found earlier. He retrieved it from his small hidden pouch, tracing the smiling faces with a thumb. He thought of the woman with the apple pie, her simple, unburdened kindness. These scattered fragments of American life, collected from the interiors of their cars, began to weave a new narrative in his mind, one that contradicted every tenet he had been taught. The enemy was not a monolithic, soulless entity, but a vast collection of individuals, each with their own joys, sorrows, hopes, and mundane routines. Their strength, he slowly realized, was not just in their factories or their vast resources, but in this deep, seemingly unshakable foundation of ordinary civilian life, untouched by the immediate ravages of war. The contrast between the propaganda's image of a struggling, decadent nation and the reality of this vibrant, abundant society became an almost unbearable weight. His mind, once so certain, now felt like a battlefield, old loyalties clashing with new truths. He saw the brightly lit streets of the nearby town from a distance one night, a soft glow against the dark horizon, and imagined the life unfolding beneath those lights. Families gathered, music playing, laughter echoing. It was a world of comfort and peace, a world his leaders had promised his people, but one they had failed to deliver. The disillusionment was no longer a quiet cold, but a dull ache, a constant thrumming beneath the surface of his thoughts, questioning everything he had once held sacred. The fortress of his beliefs was not just collapsing, it was dissolving, brick by invisible brick, into the humid American air. The dull ache in Klaus's chest deepened with each passing day, a constant reminder of the chasm that had opened between his indoctrinated world and the bewildering reality before him. He found himself scrutinizing every detail, not with contempt as before, but with a desperate, almost fearful need to understand. The sheer scale of American life continued to defy comprehension. He overheard a guard casually mentioning the vast network of roads stretching across the continent, connecting cities and towns, a testament to an infrastructure built not for war, but for the effortless movement of people and their possessions. It was a concept so alien to a nation that had focused all its might on military logistics that such civilian expansiveness felt almost fantastical. The cars themselves, endlessly arriving, each one a small, personal capsule of a life, spoke of a freedom of movement and a material comfort that felt almost sacrilegious to a man whose youth had been defined by scarcity and rigid control. He remembered the propaganda posters, vivid and stark, depicting an America riddled with unemployment lines and crumbling factories, its people starving beneath the heel of capitalist oppressors. Yet, here, the factories hummed, not with the frantic, desperate rhythm of wartime production for survival, but with the steady, confident pulse of an economy geared towards fulfilling the desires of its populace. He saw advertisements in discarded newspapers, showing lavish spreads of food, smiling families gathered around tables laden with dishes that were unimaginable luxuries in his homeland. The image of the sirloin roast from that shopping list haunted him, a symbol of an abundance so casual it bordered on insolence. Schmidt, his face a map of weary resignation, watched Klaus one afternoon as he meticulously polished a chrome bumper, his movements almost ritualistic. "They have their movies, their music, their endless roads," Schmidt rumbled, his voice low, "and we had glory," they said, for a little while. There was no bitterness in his tone, only a profound sense of loss, a recognition that perhaps the glory had been a fleeting illusion, bought at an unbearable price. Klaus felt a familiar tightening in his stomach, a knot of resentment mixed with a growing, terrifying empathy. He thought of his own family, of the small, carefully rationed meals, the constant worry etched on his mother's face. What had they gained, truly? What future had been promised that could justify such a disparity? One evening, a group of prisoners was tasked with clearing out a storage shed filled with items salvaged from abandoned vehicles. Among them, Klaus discovered a stack of brightly colored comic books. The pages, filled with vibrant illustrations and fantastical stories of heroes and villains, were a stark contrast to the grim, didactic literature of his own upbringing. He found himself turning the pages, mesmerized by the simple, escapist narratives, the bold lines, the innocent adventures. It was a cultural shock of a different kind, not the shock of abundance, but the shock of a culture that allowed for such unburdened, frivolous joy, even in the midst of a global conflict. His own childhood felt suddenly gray, muted, stripped of such vibrant fantasies. He tucked one away, a small square rebellion against the rigid seriousness that had defined his youth. Later that night, in the dim light of the barracks, Klaus retrieved the photograph he had found, its edges now softened by his constant handling. He looked at the smiling woman, the laughing children, their faces illuminated by an unseen sun. He laid it beside the comic book, the juxtaposition striking. The quiet domestic bliss of the family, the exuberant fantasy of the comic. Both spoke of a world that nurtured happiness, that allowed space for individual joy and imagination. He remembered the woman with the apple pie, her gentle eyes, her simple act of kindness. He tried to superimpose the faces from the photograph onto the caricatures of the enemy that still flickered in the recesses of his mind, but the images refused to merge. The propaganda had created a monster, a faceless enemy, but here were faces, real and undeniable, full of human warmth and ordinary desires. He thought of the diary entries Richter had translated, of the young woman's worries about her brother balanced with her excitement over a new dress and a dance. It was not a world devoid of pain or fear, but one where such anxieties coexisted with the pursuit of everyday happiness, where life, in all its mundane, beautiful complexity, continued. His nation, he realized with a chilling clarity, had demanded the complete suppression of such individual joys, such personal narratives, all for the sake of a collective abstract ideal. The cost had not just been lives and resources, but the very fabric of human experience, sacrificed on the altar of an ideology that now seemed hollow, a grand deception. The fortress was not merely dissolving, it was revealing itself to have been built on sand, a mirage sustained by lies and enforced by fear. The weight of this realization pressed down on him, a heavy, silent burden. And so it was that in the quiet hum of American engines and the scent of apple pie, Klaus's world fractured and then reformed. The rigid certainty he had carried across the ocean, the unwavering belief in a glorious future built on sacrifice and ideological purity, had dissolved like smoke. The comic book, now tucked alongside the faded photograph of the smiling family, became not a rebellion, but a quiet testament to a different kind of strength, one found in joy, in abundance, in the simple, cherished moments of ordinary, unburdened lives. He no longer saw decadence, but a formidable, resilient society, its power rooted not in military might alone, but in the everyday prosperity and shared humanity of its people. Schmidt, one afternoon, watching Klaus meticulously reassemble a carburetor, simply stated, "The world, it seems, is larger than we were told, isn't it, boy?" Klaus, without looking up, merely nodded, a silent acknowledgement of a truth that had taken a war and a continent to reveal. His own nation's sacrifices, once imbued with such profound meaning, now seemed a tragic misdirection, a cruel bargain for a future that already existed, effortlessly and vibrantly, in the hands of those they had been taught to despise. The chasm between expectation and reality had closed, leaving behind not emptiness, but a vast, complex landscape of understanding, tinged with a deep, reflective sorrow for what had been lost, both personally and collectively. The questions of purpose and truth, once so clear, now resided in the quiet moments between tasks, in the faint scent of gasoline mingling with the ghost of cinnamon, in the silent, smiling faces in a forgotten photograph. He understood now that the greatest strength lay not in rigid adherence to an ideology, but in the simple, undeniable resilience of human life itself, in its capacity for connection, kindness, and the pursuit of ordinary happiness. The war had stripped him of his uniform and his certainties, but it had unexpectedly given him a new pair of eyes. Therefore, the narrative of Klaus, the German prisoner of war who found a new truth amidst American civilian cars, offers a poignant reflection on the human cost of ideology and the transformative power of unexpected encounters. It reminds us that reality often holds more nuance and humanity than the narratives we are fed. If this story resonated with you, consider sharing your thoughts in the comments below, liking this video, and subscribing to our channel for more historical insights.